Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here as your Saturnine school mistress, ready to make sure that you have effectively been studying your ephemeris tables, unless you want a spanking, which I'm sure some of you do. So I'm beginning things like that because today's aspect or transit that we are talking about is Sun conjunct Saturn. And Sun conjunct Saturn is all about sowing the seeds of Stoicism. So, in terms of the sun representing our personal development, sometimes the only way we can do that is by being willing to undergo a period of instruction, of being willing to subdue and discipline and tame our nature so that we can use it more effectively, so that we can make our bodies and minds a tool in the hands of our higher selves. So I should probably clarify what I mean by this schism between the higher and the lower self. Very often, if you look at Hindu religious art or the religious art of Tibetan Buddhism, when they depict a deity in all its glory, especially when it's in a semi-raffle or dancing aspect, it is shown moving about, but stood, pivoted on the body of some monster or demon, or perhaps on another deity. And this is meant to signify and symbolize the conquest of a particular part of the lower self by the higher self. So the lower self isn't necessarily inferior, but it is the part of us that is governed solely by its immediate wants, by its desires, by its impulses, by its moods, by its feelings, and only ever thinks in terms of immediate gratification. If it's hungry, it wants to eat. If it's angry, it wants to have a fight or shout at something. If it's sad, it wants to cry. If it's bored, it wants to go off in search of something more interesting. And this lower part of ourself, this impulsive lower part of ourself, is very important because it's where our childish, animalistic, bestial vitality comes from, which we need in order to have enough energy to do any of the things that we want in life. But if we leave that lower part of ourselves in an undeveloped state, then very often we are not able to achieve any of the things that we want to achieve, because so much of the process of self-mastery means forcing oneself to undergo long periods of denial and self-subjugation, in which we make ourselves do things that are difficult, arduous, and tough and dull and unpleasant, all with the idea that at some point it will help us refine some kind of skill, attribute, or quality of character that we are later hoping to capitalize upon. And a large part of achieving this self mastery involves having the fortitude, courage, and patience to confront one's inner obstacles, the barriers that we build up around ourselves, the resistance that we craft about ourselves that can often hold itself back. So, in terms of using ourselves as an effective tool, we have to be aware of our limitations, of how far we can go and how much we can do and where we need to stop. But for some people, they can mistake their insecurities and their fears and their dislikes for genuine limitations. We can construct these barriers around ourselves that prevent us moving forward in life simply because we know in order to fully master and acquire a given skill, we would have to spend a lot of time doing things or learning things that would be painful or difficult to us. This is where we have to confront part of us, part of our inner child that looks at some special skill or attribute that we desperately need in order to become more effective and self-sufficient, and just says, I don't wanna, I don't like that, that's nasty, and I would rather just say, I can't do that and get someone else to do it for me. But if we give in fully to that inner child, we end up becoming more dependent on other people rather than being able to develop our own resources, that so that there is more of life that we can potentially control. Because the more we are able to control ourselves, the more we find we are able to extend that control to things that are within our immediate environment. For instance, in order to reach a point where I felt comfortable enough standing in front of this camera and saying, "Behold, world, unto you an astrologer is born, come unto me for reception of stellar wisdom," I had to overcome a lot of insecurities and put myself through the paces in terms of confronting where my comfort zones had become furnished with barbed wire, because I am naturally someone who is an intuitive and spontaneous person. I love to learn, and I love to analyze, and I love to look at for psychological patterns and traits, and all of those things come very naturally to me. But there are whole swathes of astrological skills that did not make sense to me at all when I first confronted them. And rather than confronting those blockages, I went through very long periods where there were certain parts of astrology that I just refused to look at. I just outright denied their legitimacy, or resisted any possibility of engaging with them, particularly when it comes to placements and transits, which I now consider to be the very essence of astrology. For the longest of time, it made no sense to me. And there is a very human response to things that don't immediately intuitively make sense to us, because it makes us feel ignorant and stupid when actually we want to feel wise and capable. We can build up walls around them. We say, "I don't understand this, therefore it must be dumb. I don't need it. I'm fine without it." But I reached a point in my development where I decided that rather than just being a dilettante, I did want to be some kind of specialist. I did want to be some kind of expert or hierophant whom people could come to for stellar knowledge, so that I could be of service to other people. I'm a Virgo. I want to help. That is one of my driving motivations in this life. But I also have that perfectionist drive. And for the longest of times, I was afraid of opening my mouth about anything to do with astrology, because I was always terrified of giving the wrong answer. And that's one of the more difficult parts of Saturn, is that we can end up overinflating our self-criticisms. We can see our mistakes to the detriment of everything else. And by itself, that isn't a bad quality, because the only way we can truly improve and refine a skill is by looking honestly at ourselves and appraising those areas where there is room for improvement, where our given technique or approach to things isn't as effective as it could be, and we understand that some kind of moderation, some kind of temperance and adjustment needs to take place in order to make ourselves a more refined tool. Someone who's playing an instrument might realize that there is a certain key they're not very good at playing in, a certain style they're not very good at playing in. Maybe they're not very good at improvising, and they need to sit themselves down and focus on those weaknesses so that they can be a better rounded and more holistic virtuoso. And the same can be applied to any kind of discipline, looking at those weak areas and trying to strengthen them. But sometimes Saturn can sit too thoroughly upon us, and we can be so aware of our weak areas that all of our strengths and positive qualities seem to be completely eclipsed by the shadow of our mistakes, of our sins, of the guilt of our ineptitude. So for some people, Saturn can end up manifesting as the monster of doubt, the devil of dubiety, who perches on our shoulder and tells us that no matter what we try, no matter what enterprises we attempt to undertake, nothing will ever be good enough, and we will always fall short. It's the voice of the adults who criticized us and made us feel unworthy when we were younger that lives on within us and undermines our confidence or courage in attempting anything. But we don't have to be ruled by this. The thing is, self-criticism and acknowledgement of one's failings and frailties are necessary qualities in terms of developing ourselves. Only by truly being accountable and honest about the things we are not very good at can we begin to put any kind of practical structure or plan in place to correct and smooth out and develop those rough edges that are still waiting to be pruned and brought to a state of beautification. But if we take the self-criticism too far, if we end up turning that into a lifestyle, then we end up enervating ourselves. We make ourselves feel so discouraged, so demoralized that we don't even try. We don't even get beyond the starting gate because we have assumed failure as the only possible outcome. We feel our insecurities so strongly within that we assume they can only ever lead to barren results in the outer world. And part of having the discipline to really develop a skill and to become a master or mistress in it is to refuse to be dominated and undone by that voice. We all have those low moments where we are brought low by it, where we don't feel we can carry on, and yet if we have those solid discipline structures in our lives, we get up and we do it anyway. And so part of learning to tame and work with that Saturn is to make rules and guidelines that we live by, which we refuse to deviate from. For instance, if we are trying to become more muscular or to lose weight, we say, I will get up on such and such a days and go to the gym at a certain time, regardless of how I'm feeling. Even if it's a day when I'm feeling depressed and low, or not terribly energetic, or terrified of even being seen by my peers in the gym for fear of humiliation and mockery and appearing inferior to everyone else, I will still go. And that on those days when, we can't face the idea of sitting down and writing, or in my case, making an astrological video, we do it anyway. And that is part of working with Saturn, is having that discipline and hardiness of spirit to do what must be done, regardless of whether we are really feeling up to it as we would like. For instance, I am not feeling very confident about this particular video. I'm finding it hard to speak. I'm feeling very insecure. I'm not finding that my thoughts are flowing or being as structured as I would like. At time of recording, the moon is in opposition to Saturn. So I'm feeling very undermined by that. And yet I have placed a rule in place that I will make a video about every transit that occurs, regardless of how I'm feeling. So even though I am currently ashamed of myself and the deficiencies I feel in the articulation and expression of my own knowledge, because I've made that Saturnine rule for myself, I go ahead anyway. And being the one who imposes that discipline upon yourself is part of the strengths of Sun conjunct Saturn. So this conjunction is a time for putting those rules and structures and plans in place and refusing to deviate from them by looking at the long-term objectives and goals that we want to reach and beginning to itemize all the practical steps we have to go through in order to get where we want, and then going through them, not holding back, not letting our insecurities and fears and resistances and comfort zones keep us where we are, but saying, I will do these things over this set period during this time frame, and I will not permit anything to get in my way. Anyway, that's enough from me now. Feel free to share your own insecurities and fears and Saturnine techniques of self-development with me, and I will be with you tomorrow for Venus conjunct Neptune for a video of a very different quality.